Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to what is shaping up to be the single worst decision of Holt Ace Marrow's entire life. And folks, that is a crowded field. For those of you just joining us, 41 years old, standing on the 18th tee of the Blackwater Municipal Golf Course, 3 practice swings deep into a lightning delay that every single other human being on this property has had the good sense to sit out. The horn sounded 11 minutes ago. The horn means go inside. The horn does not mean, well, technically it's still my turn. But this is Holt Marrow we're talking about, folks. Never made it past the mini tour, never got a card, spent 19 years in a broadcast booth calling other men's greatness for a regional cable package nobody's grandmother could find on her remote. And if there is one thing, one single thing, this man has never once in his life been able to do, it's leave a round unfinished. He's not going to lay up, I tell the empty fairway, because there is no color commentator up here with me. There's just me, narrating myself into a decision I already know is stupid. He's not laying up. He never lays up. And folks, that's either the most admirable thing about him, or it's going to be the last thing about him, and I genuinely do not know which. Sky the color of a fresh bruise, rain coming sideways now. The flag on 18 is snapping so hard it sounds like gunfire. 90 yards out, tucked behind a bunker, I have 3 putted for 11 consecutive years. And somewhere above me, a great deal of atmospheric electricity is having a conversation with the highest metal object for a mile in any direction, which is currently the graphite driver in my hands. I take the shot anyway. I want it on record for whoever's listening, wherever this broadcast ends up, that it was a good shot. Clean contact, right down the stick, the kind of swing you dream about your whole mediocre amateur life and never quite. And that's the ball game, folks. No pain. If you're wondering, that's the honest broadcast booth truth of it. 1 second, I'm watching my own ball flight against a sky like a slammed door, and the next second, there is a sound like the world itself getting body checked. And then there is no next second. There is just white, and then there is nothing. And I want to tell you, it felt like something profound, but mostly it just felt like getting yanked off air mid-sentence. Final commentary from the booth, he never did find out if that ball found the green. Here is the thing nobody tells you about dying with your mouth open mid-sentence. You keep talking. And we're back, I hear myself say, except I'm not saying it out loud, or maybe I am. I genuinely cannot tell, because I do not currently have confirmed possession of a mouth. We're back after what the broadcast is calling a significant delay. And folks, I have to be honest with you, I don't love our new camera angle. The new camera angle is flat on my back, in mud, under a sky that is on fire in a way that has nothing to do with lightning. Something enormous whistles overhead. Not thunder. Wrong shape of sound. A long, tearing note that ends in a crack against stone I can't see yet, and the ground under me jumps like a struck drum. Somewhere close, men are screaming in a way that is not the screaming of golfers who have just 3-putted. I sit up. My body does what I tell it, which is already stranger than anything that has happened to me today, all things considered. I'm wearing armor, bad armor, the kind a quartermaster hands you when you are not expected to survive using it, and I'm lying in a trench of churned mud behind a low wooden barricade. And beyond the barricade is a field, and beyond the field is a wall, gray and enormous and on fire in 2 places. And above the wall, the sky is doing something my brain keeps trying and failing to file under weather. Okay, I say, out loud this time, definitely out loud, because a man 3 feet away flinches at the sound of my voice like I'm the strange one here. Okay, new venue. I can work with a new venue. That's when the words show up. They don't appear, exactly. There's no shimmering box, no chime, nothing you'd storyboard for a commercial. They're just suddenly known, the way you know your own name, occupying a space in my head that used to be occupied by absolutely nothing, because until roughly 90 seconds ago, I was a corpse on a fairway in Ohio. System calibration. Host accepted, class assigned, the perfect stroke. Summary, any thrown, launched, loosed, or swung projectile under host control will strike its intended target with total accuracy. Wind, humidity, spin, drag, elevation, and planetary rotation are calculated automatically, and without conscious effort on the part of the host. Force, a damage, and follow-through remain entirely the host's responsibility. I read it twice. Somewhere behind me, a man in gill colors I don't recognize is shouting orders that boil down to the wall is failing and we don't have anything left to throw at them. And somewhere in front of me, past the barricade, I can see the source of that long, tearing whistle. A siege engine the size of a house, cranking back for another shot aimed, as far as I can tell, at the exact stretch of wall that's already burning. And here's a stone. Somebody's dropped stone, fist-sized, sitting in the mud 6 inches from my hand, presumably meant for a sling that its owner is no longer using on account of currently being dead 8 feet to my left. I have never in my life thrown anything harder than a golf ball, and even those. Historically, I have thrown badly out of pure frustration into ponds on 4 separate documented occasions. Talk me through this, I mutter and pick up the stone, and something in the back of my skull, not a voice, more like a stat sheet nobody asked for, quietly informs me. Wind, 6 miles an hour, southwest-southwest, gusting to 11. Humidity, 61%. Target, the tension rope on the counterweight arm, 60 yards, elevated 11 degrees. Confidence, 100%. I have been a broadcast professional for 19 years. I know exactly what a call sounds like when you already know how it ends. And here's the wind-up, I say, and I am fully aware that I am narrating my own life again, that I have apparently died and been immediately reissued the single most embarrassing personality trait I owned in my first one, and here's the throw, and folks, the stone leaves my hand and I lose sight of it in about 0.4 of a second because it is moving considerably faster than any stone I have ever personally thrown. And it does not hit the siege engine, and it does not hit the operators. It hits the rope, the one exact rope holding 60 pounds of coiled tension at the one exact point where a rope like that is one fiber away from failing anyway. And the whole engine folds in on itself like a chair somebody kicked out from under a very large man, and the crew scatters, and the tearing whistle sound does not happen a second time. Silence for about 2 full seconds. Then somebody near me starts laughing, not happy laughing, the other kind, the kind that comes out of people who have been awake and afraid for 3 days straight and just watched something they can't explain. And the man who'd been shouting orders turns around and looks at me and looks at the collapsed siege engine and looks at me again. Do that again, he says. I'd love to, I tell him entirely honestly. But I'm going to need someone to explain to me where I am, whose army this is, why there's a castle on fire, and ideally my own name, because I think it's Holt. But it has been a very strange morning. His name, it turns out, is Sergeant Dobb. No rank insignia I recognize, but the way every other man in the trench defers to him tells me everything the insignia would have. And the castle is called Thornhollow, and the army trying to burn it down belongs currently to nobody in particular, which is apparently the whole problem. Duchess Rowan's men, Dobb says, jerking a thumb at the wall behind us, meaning the defenders, meaning us, apparently, now. Hired blades, half of them, been under siege 11 days. Company that's been throwing rocks at us the last 2 is freelance. No banner, no lord, just men who heard the Duchess's coffers are running dry and figured they'd get here before whoever eventually does take the castle needs the walls repaired. So nobody's actually fighting for anything. Everybody's fighting for the castle, Dobb says, like I'm slow. Nobody's fighting for her. I file that away because it is the single most interesting sentence anyone has said to me since I died, and because there is no time to unpack it, because a second siege engine, there were apparently 3, a fact nobody mentioned, has just found its range on the burning stretch of wall, and I am already reaching for another stone before I've consciously decided to. Here's the part I want on record for whoever's still listening. I was scared. I want to be clear about that, because in about 6 hours, I am going to do something monumentally stupid on purpose, sober, with witnesses, and I don't want anyone thinking I'd stopped being scared by then. I was scared the whole time. I just discovered somewhere in that trench, watching stone after stone leave my hand and land exactly where I told it to, that scared and good at something can apparently sit in the same chest at the same time. 3 more engines go down before the freelance company decides Thornhollow isn't worth whatever they were being paid and pulls back into the tree line, and Sergeant Dobb, a gray-bearded, missing 2 fingers on his offhand, looking at me like I am either the answer to 11 days of prayer or a very serious new problem, sits down heavily on the wrecked barricade and says, "Right, You'd best come meet the Duchess. I feel like there should be a form, I say. For this, dying and getting a magic gift and immediately winning somebody else's siege, there should be paperwork. There's ale, Dobbs says. Ale's better than paperwork. I decide on the spot that I like this man enormously and follow him toward the gate of a castle that is currently on fire in 2 places and that I do not yet know I'm going to own by the end of the week. Thornhollow, up close, is the kind of castle that was clearly built to be impressive about 200 years ago and has spent every year since then being expensive instead. Scaffolding patches 3 different sections of outer wall. The inner bailey smells like smoke and wet stone, and faintly like a stable nobody's mucked out in longer than is medically advisable. Servants, I count maybe a dozen, for what should be a household of 80, move with the specific hurried blankness of people who have stopped expecting good news and have not yet worked out what comes after that. And at the top of the gatehouse stairs, arms crossed, dressed in mourning black that has gone gray at the hems from where, is a woman who is looking down at the wrecked siege engines in the field with an expression I will spend the next several weeks trying and failing to correctly describe on air, even to myself. Sergeant, she says, not looking away from the field, who broke my siege. He did, your grace. Dobb nudges me forward with the not entirely gentle hand between my shoulder blades. Came out of nowhere. Threw a rock through a tension rope from 60 yards in the middle of a squall. Then did it 2 more times. The Duchess looks at me. I have interviewed championship golfers on the worst day of their careers, men who just 3-putted away $400,000, and I have never once been looked at like that, like I am simultaneously the best news she's had in 11 days, and one more expense she absolutely cannot afford. Duchess, I sold a Rowan, she says. This is my castle, or it was this morning, and given how this week has gone, I expect it to remain a matter of some debate by supper. Who are you? I open my mouth and the commentator in the back of my skull, the one I apparently cannot fire, even in death, supplies the only honest answer I've got. Holt Marrow, I say. Recently deceased, currently your best available option. And your grace, I've got to be honest with you, I have absolutely no idea what happens next, but I promise you, I'm going to narrate every single second of it. She does not laugh. She does, for exactly 1 second, almost smile before she catches herself and turns it back into the tired, guarded, furious expression of a woman who has been losing a war for 11 days and has just watched a stranger end an entire engagement with 3 thrown rocks. Come inside, she says, before something else tries to kill you, and I have to find out what you can do about that too. I follow her in. Behind me, out past the shattered barricade, the field is quiet for the first time in 11 days. They put me in what Dobb calls the good cell, which turns out to be broadcast speak for a disused guest chamber nobody's bothered to clean since a wealthier era of Thornhollow's history, and while a servant girl, who won't quite meet my eyes, brings me bread and a bowl of something that is technically stew. Dobb leans in the doorway and gives me the 2-minute version of a world I apparently died into without so much as a program to follow along with. Continents called the Vile March, near enough, he says. 6 duchies worth arguing over, more free companies than anyone's bothered to count, and a border custom or 3 for every way a keep can change hands without a proper war attached to it. You'll want to learn those. Saves lives. And the starter? I ask, because Isolde said it twice tonight without noticing she'd said it. The way you say a word you've stopped hearing is strange. Her Grace mentioned him. Something about a last tea. Dobbs' face does something complicated. Not fear, exactly. More the specific caution of a man discussing a landlord he's never met but pays rent to anyway. Old expression. Comes from further west, where they play at a sport with sticks and a little ball and more patience than sense, or so I'm told. Never seen it myself. Story goes, there's a fellow up top who sends every soul off down its course when its time comes, same as any starter waves off a match. Folks swear on him without believing in him, mostly. Same as anyone swears on anything they can't see and hope isn't listening too closely. I don't tell him that I have, as of roughly 6 hours ago, extremely direct personal experience with sticks, little balls, and more patience than sense, or that the last thing I remember of my old life is a horn I ignored and a sky that made its opinion known about it. I file it instead, quietly, next to the handicap notice and the growing, uneasy sense that whoever built the rules of this new life of mine had a considerably darker sense of humor than I've given them credit for so far. Get some sleep, Dobbs says instead, mistaking my silence for simple exhaustion, which, fairly enough, it also is. Whatever you are, lad, you earned that much tonight. It will not stay that way. But for one evening, in a castle I do not yet know I'm about to win in a drunken wager and a stolen bottle of sleeping draught, it is, against every possible odds, almost peaceful. And that, I think, unable to help myself even now, is how you end a broadcast on a high note. Chapter 2. The Open Gate. Here's something they don't teach you in 19 years of broadcast school. How to sit across a supper table from a woman who is quietly, methodically drinking herself toward a decision she's already made and not say anything because you can tell the way you can tell a golfer's about to snap a club over his knee 3 shots before he does it. That this is not a conversation you interrupt. Duchess Isolde Rowan drinks like she does everything else I've seen her do so far, precisely, and like it costs her something. 11 days, she says, to the wine more than to me, and the only thing that's actually worked fell out of the sky wearing a dead man's armor and talking to himself. She looks up. No offense. Taken as constructive, I say. For what it's worth, Your Grace. I'd like to point out I also fixed your siege problem for free, which by my count makes me the best investment this castle's made all week. That gets the almost smile again. Across the hall, at a table that's seen better centuries, Sergeant Daub is working through what appears to be his 3rd plate with the single-minded focus of a man who spent 11 days rationing, and beside him a narrow, dry-faced man in steward's gray is watching me with the specific wariness of somebody doing math. You haven't met Bram, Isolde says, following my glance. Bram Osler, steward of Thorn Hollow. For as long as there's been a Thorn Hollow to be steward of, he's the one who'll tell you the honest cost of everything I'm too tired to. Bram inclines his head about 4 degrees, the exact minimum required by Manus. My lady's household owes back wages to 11 guardsmen, 4 grooms, and a smith who has, as of Tuesday, stopped answering knocks at his door. The creditors in Vantage have twice sent men to inquire, politely for now, about the standing debt against this holding. And Lord Drex of the Eastern March has offered on 3 separate occasions to relieve my lady of the burden of ownership, terms unspecified, which in my professional experience as a steward generally means the terms are worse than the burden. So the freelance company outside, I say slowly, wasn't the real problem. The freelance company, Isolde says, was a symptom. Word travels, Master Marrow. A castle that can't pay its own garrison is a castle that can't hold its own walls. And every mercenary company and hungry lord on this stretch of border knows it. I could win every siege from now until the starter takes his last tea, and it wouldn't fix the fact that I own a very large, very expensive stone problem that is actively bleeding me dry. I don't know what the starter takes his last tea means in this world as an expression. I file it distantly, next to the growing pile of things about this place I don't understand, but I understand the rest of it fine. I've covered enough hard luck franchises to recognize the sound of somebody who's already accepted they're going to lose and is just negotiating with herself over how. So sell it, I say. Walk away. You don't sell a duchy, Master Marrow, you lose it, and there is an enormous difference in how history remembers the two. She refills her own glass before Bram can do it for her, which I'm starting to understand is a small act of rebellion in itself. Unless, of course, someone invokes the open gate. Then it isn't a sale, and it isn't a loss. It's a right, older than any of the crowns that pretend to rule this border, and no court in 6 duchies can call it theft. The open gate, I repeat. Bram, evidently deciding I'm either going to be a genuine problem or genuinely useful, and hedging his bets on the latter, sets down his fork and explains it like the professional he is. An old custom, my lord. Forgive me, Master Marrow. Predating formal Sag law, if a single challenger, alone, unaided, and without spilling blood, can breach a lord's keep between dusk and dawn and lay hand on the hearthstone in the great hall, the holding passes to him at sunrise, clean, legal, no war, no debt transferred, no shame attached to the loser beyond the fact that her walls weren't equal to one man's cunning. It exists, he adds with the driest possible delivery. Specifically for holdings exactly this insolvent, it is, in effect, a dignified way to lose. And there's always a watch set, Isolde says. One man posted at the hearth itself, whose only job is to not be alone with a bottle of wine and a challenger's silver tongue, because half the open gates in border history were won with bribery dressed up as cunning. You'd have to get past a night watch, a portcullis nobody's oiled since my grandfather's time, and a dog that hates everyone, including me. And you'd have to do it without so much as a bloody nose on either side, or the rights void, and you've just committed a crime. She says, all of this looking directly at me, and there's a beat, 1 full second, where I understand with the total clarity of a man who has called exactly one previous chapter of his own life and gotten it catastrophically wrong, that she is not making conversation. She is offering me something, not out loud, not in a way she could ever be held to, but offering it the way you offer a rival exactly enough rope to hang your own problem for you. You're serious, I say quietly. I am 3 glasses of very bad wine into 11 sleepless days, Master Marrow, and I am the last Rowan holding a keep my family can no longer afford. I am allowed to be a great many things tonight. Serious is the least alarming of them. She stands, a little unsteady, a lot dignified about it. The watch changes at midnight. The dog's name is March Payne, and he only likes bacon. Do with that information whatever a man does with information he was never actually given. She leaves. Bram watches her go with an expression I can't fully read and then turns it on me instead. For what it's worth, he says, she hasn't smiled. Not the real kind, not once, since her father died and left her this. Whatever you decide to do tonight, Master Marrow, I'd ask you to consider that you're not the only one at this table who's about to make a decision she can't take back. I want to be honest about my internal state at this point because I think it matters for the broadcast record. I had every intention of going to bed. I really did. I sat there after Bram left, turning a mug of Waterdale in slow circles, telling myself that whatever Isolde Rowan had or hadn't just offered me, taking an entire duchy from a grieving, exhausted, overmatched woman inside 12 hours of arriving on her doorstep was, at minimum, extremely rude, and possibly the single most aggressive thing I could do with a magic power that so far I'd only used to save lives. And then I thought about 18 years of narrating other men doing the hard thing while I stood on the sideline explaining why it was hard, and I thought about a lightning bolt on the 18th hole, and I thought, and I want it on record that I recognize how this sounds. I never once, in either life, walked off a course with a hole still standing between me and the clubhouse. So at 11:30, I went and found Widow Tansy. She keeps a stall against the inner bailey wall, technically inside the castle grounds because Thornhollow's village folded into the walls 2 sieges ago and never fully unfolded back out, and she is exactly the kind of person every besieged castle needs and never properly pays. An apothecary who trades in things nobody asks too many questions about, because asking questions is bad for a business built on discretion. Sleeping draft, I told her. Strong, fast, something you put in a hearth fire, not a cup. I need it airborne, not swallowed. She looked at me for a long moment, the specific look of a woman doing math on how much trouble a stranger is about to cause versus how much silver he's about to pay her for the privilege, and named a price that was, frankly, criminal, and I paid it because I did not currently have a competing use for money I hadn't technically owned 12 hours ago. Smoke root and dreamvine, she said, corking the little clay bottle. Burns sweet, not bitter. Nobody'll smell trouble in it till they're already half under. 1 dose puts a grown man out in 4 breaths. Whatever you're planning, Master Marrow. She'd heard my name already. Word moves fast in a castle this small. Do it before the smell clears the chimney, or you'll be explaining yourself to a very awake dog. Here's the highlight reel, folks, because that's the only way my brain will let me tell it. Cut down, replayed. The good parts up front the way you'd package it for the 6 o'clock recap. Marrow, scaling the kitchen wall at midnight using a drain pipe that groans like it's personally offended. Bad knees, worse balance, a body still figuring out exactly which of its new abilities extend past throw things with unreasonable accuracy. Turns out, mercifully, not much. and I nearly find that out the hard way twice before I get a hand on the chimney stack of the Great Hall. Marrow, uncorking a stolen bottle of sleeping draft 11 feet above a sleeping castle, doing math he has no business doing without a system telling him the answer. No calibration this time, no cheerful little confidence percentage, because this isn't a throw. This is just a man and a bottle and a very long drop if he's wrong about the wind carrying the smoke down instead of out. I do it anyway. I pour it into the flue, and I listen to it hiss faintly against the banked embers below, and I count under my breath the way I used to count seconds of dead air during a broadcast delay. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Four breaths, Widow Tansy said. I hear, faint and muffled through 2 floors of stone, the specific soft clunk of a night watchman deciding, very suddenly and without meaning to, that the floor looks like an excellent place for a nap. Marchpane the dog does not, as promised, hate bacon. Marchpane the dog, it turns out, hates me considerably less than he loves the strip of it I have been carrying in my coat pocket since supper, on the theory that a man who's already committed grand larceny against a duchy might as well commit minor bribery against a very good boy too. He follows me across the bailey at a companionable trot and does not so much as growl. The portcullis, exactly as advertised, hasn't been oiled since somebody's grandfather. I use my belt knife and a truly unreasonable amount of patience instead of force, because force means noise, and noise means blood, and blood means the whole right comes apart in my hands. 40 minutes I spend on that gate, folks. 40 minutes of the single least glamorous heist sequence in the history of magical golf powers, easing an iron grate up 1 groaning inch at a time, and if you told 19 years in a broadcast booth me that the most important shot of my life would be 40 minutes of not making a sound, I'd have called it the worst pitch for a highlight reel I'd ever heard. But I get through. And past the gate, up the last stair in a great hall lit by 1 banked fire and full of a sleeping guardsman snoring is the hearthstone, a slab of black rock worn smooth by 200 years of Rowan hands set into the floor before the fireplace like it's been waiting the whole time for somebody exactly this stubborn to show up. I put my hand on it at 4 minutes past 4 in the morning. There's no fanfare, no system chime, just cold stone under my palm, and the sleeping guard's snore, hitching once and settling, and somewhere above me through the smoke hole, the very first gray suggestion of dawn. Holding acquired, Thorn Hollow keep by right of the open gate, handicap adjustment, pending future review. That second line means nothing to me yet. I read it, filed it, under system nonsense, unclear, revisit later, and went and found somewhere to sit down before my legs decided to stop being involved in this plan. Dawn breaks over Thorn Hollow with Sergeant Dobbs standing in the Great Hall doorway, arms crossed, looking at me sitting on the floor next to a hearthstone with a dog's head in my lap, and Bram Osler 1 step behind him, doing a very fast, very professional recalculation of every single thing he'd said to me the night before. You actually did it, Dobbs says. I actually did it. I agree. Somebody's going to need to explain to the sleeping fellow by the door that he's not in trouble, by the way. That was the draft, not a personal failing. Bram looks at the guardsman, looks at me, looks at the hearthstone, and does the math out loud because I think he needs to hear it as much as I do. Then, by the open gate, and witnessed by the household of Thorn Hollow at first light, the holding passes. He says it like a man reading a verdict he wrote himself and still can't quite believe. You're the lord of this castle, Master Marrow. God and grandfather's portcullis help us both. That's when Isolde comes down the stairs. She's dressed, properly dressed. Not last night's grief black, but something structured, deliberate, a woman who did not sleep and used the time instead to decide exactly how she was going to carry this. She stops 3 steps up, looks at the sleeping guard, looks at the dog in my lap, looks at me, and I watch. I am a professional watcher of faces. It is the only skill I brought over from my old life fully intact. I watch her feel about 4 different things in the space of 2 seconds, and let exactly none of them all the way onto her face. Well, she says, I did tell you the watch changes at midnight. I never said I expected you to actually listen. You gave me a dog's name and his favorite food, Your Grace. I say, that's not a warning, that's a game plan. For 1/2 of 1 second, she really does smile. The real kind, Bram's kind, the one he said he hadn't seen since her father died, and then it's gone, tucked back behind the composed, exhausted dignity of a woman who has just lost everything and is refusing, on pure spite, to let it show. "It's Isolde," she says. "If you're going to own my family's castle, Master Marrow, you may as well use my name while you do it." And that, folks, that right there is how a third-string broadcast commentator with a dead man's magic golf swing ends up 4 days into his second life, holding a castle, a debt he doesn't yet understand the size of, a dog named Marchpane, and the very close, very undivided attention of the woman he took it all from. I'd call that a hell of an opening week. Chapter 3, The Last Perfect Arrow. 3 weeks into owning a castle, and I have learned the following. Nobody tells you when you die and get handed a magic power that the power doesn't come with a bookkeeper. "You are," Bram informs me, laying a ledger across the breakfast table with the specific ceremony of a man delivering a diagnosis, "in possession of a holding that owes back wages to 11 guardsmen, 4 grooms, and a smith. You are also, as of yesterday, in possession of a reputation that 3 separate merchants have already tried to monetize without your permission. There is, I regret to inform you, a tavern in the lower village now selling something called an Ace's Draft, which I am reliably told tastes like a punishment. Flattering. It is not," Bram says, "flattering. It is a market responding to a vacancy, my lord, and the vacancy is you having any income at all. Here's the thing about being a professional broadcaster for 19 years. You learn, whether you want to or not, how a struggling franchise actually turns itself around, because you've narrated 40 of them failing to do it. You don't fix a bad team by getting one good player. You fix it by figuring out the one asset nobody else has, and building the whole operation around it before somebody else notices it's for sale. Thornhollow's one asset is currently sitting in this chair, eating porridge worth exactly nothing on a ledger because nobody in 6 duchies has figured out how to put a price on always hits. So we start putting a price on it. Within the week, I've cleared 2 bandit camps that had been quietly taxing the merchant road for a decade. 1 arrow, sometimes 2, always exactly where it needs to go. No siege, no standoff, and the road toll, money that used to vanish into bandit pockets, starts flowing cautiously back toward a castle that can suddenly guarantee safe passage. I put down a wolf pack that's been killing livestock 2 villages over in an afternoon for a fee that would have taken a professional huntsman a season to earn. Word does what word does in a place this size, which is travel faster than any horse Thornhollow currently owns. By the end of the 3rd week, Sergeant Dobb has back pay in his hand for the first time in 2 months. And I have discovered that being extremely unnaturally good at exactly one specific thing is, it turns out, a perfectly serviceable business model, provided you don't examine too closely what it's actually costing you to keep saying yes. I don't examine it. Not yet. I'm 3 weeks into my second life and still riding the high of being, for the first time since I hung up any real ambition of playing professionally, good at something people would pay to watch. Which is, in its way, exactly what gets my attention when the elf shows up. She arrives on foot, which I later learn is itself a statement, the kind of person who could requisition a horse from any garrison in 6 duchies and chooses instead to walk into your castle like she's daring the ground to slow her down. Tall in the specific way that makes doorways look like they were built with someone shorter in mind. A bow across her back that looks less like a weapon and more like a title deed, which, it turns out, is exactly what it used to be. "You're the human," she says in the great hall, without preamble, without so much as a name, in a voice pitched to carry to the back row of a much larger room than this one, who threw a stone through a tension rope at 60 yards in a squall at night. "Guilty," I say, though I feel like I should point out I've thrown considerably better stones since. "I don't care about your other stones." She says it flatly, and there is something underneath the flatness, a controlled, precise fury, the kind I recognize from every athlete I've ever watched lose a title on a technicality they can't argue with. For 11 years, I have held the name First Bow of the Green Court, longest confirmed kill shot in 3 centuries of record keeping. Do you understand what that number meant before you arrived in this world and made longest confirmed into a joke a human tells at a tavern? Bram, wisely, has already found a reason to be somewhere else. Dobb has not, and is watching this exchange with the specific delight of a man who has found free entertainment. I didn't know that was a title, I say, honestly. I didn't know there was a leaderboard. There's always a leaderboard, she says, and something in the way she says it, bitter, exact, like she's quoting somebody she used to believe, snags at me because I have said almost that exact sentence in almost that exact tone about golf more times than I'd like to admit on air. My name was carved into the Green Court's founding stone. Children were taught my draw length as the standard for correct form. And then a rumor crossed 3 borders in 9 days that a human had made a throw that shouldn't be physically possible, with a rock, in a storm, and every single person who ever called me the finest shot alive is now asking each other whether the record still counts. Lyra wins here, she adds, like an afterthought, like she'd rather I learned it from someone else and forgot to ask. And I want a contest. Fair terms, witnessed. If what they're saying about you is exaggeration, I need to know it, and I need every court from here to the green to know it too. And if it isn't, she doesn't finish that sentence. I don't make her. Name your terms, I say. We do it in the Outer Bailey at dusk because apparently that's when these things are traditionally done, and because by midday word has already brought half the lower village up to watch, which tells you something about how starved for entertainment a besieged then liberated castle actually is. Her terms are simple and, I'll admit, elegant. 5 targets, increasing distance, the last one set behind a moving obstruction, a cartwheel spun by 2 of Dobbs' men, so that the shot has to thread a gap that opens and closes on its own schedule, not the shooter's. She goes first. I want it on record because I think it matters to what happens after that Lyra Weinzeier is not merely good. She is the kind of good that looks like the world slowing down to accommodate her. 5 shots, 5 targets, the last one through a 2-inch gap in a spinning wheel at 90 yards, and the crowd doesn't cheer so much as exhale all at once like they've been holding their breath since she knocked the first arrow. It is, genuinely, one of the finest pieces of physical skill I have ever watched a human being, an elf, perform, and some old broadcast instinct in me wants to throw to a replay angle that doesn't exist here. Then it's my turn, and here's the part I still don't fully know how to feel about. 3 weeks later, it isn't hard. It was never going to be hard. Wind, 4 miles an hour, negligible drift, 90 yards, gap opening on a 2-second rotation. The system hands me the numbers before I've finished. Raising my arm, the way a good spotter feeds a golfer a yardage he didn't have to pace off himself, and I let the stone go, and it goes exactly, tediously, unglamorously where it was always going to go. The crowd doesn't exhale. The crowd goes silent in the other way, the way a room goes quiet when it realizes the game it came to watch was never actually a game. Lyra doesn't say anything for a long moment. Then she sets her bow down very carefully against the Bailey wall, like she's not sure she trusts her own hands with it anymore, and walks away without a word. And I let her go because I recognize that walk. I have done that walk. That is the walk of somebody who just found out the thing they built their whole self around was never actually about them at all. I find her 3 hours later sitting on the outer wall, looking out over the dark tree line, and I sit down next to her without asking, because I've learned that's usually the right call with people doing this particular kind of math. I used to be able to tell you, she says, not looking at me, exactly how much of every shot was skill and how much was luck. That's the whole discipline. That's 11 years of training, learning to shrink the luck down to nothing until the only variable left standing between the arrow and the target is you. And you just did the same shot with none of the training. And I can't even tell if it's worse that it was a gift or worse that some part of me still wants to know how it works. For what it's worth, I say, I didn't earn a single second of what I can do. I was a bad commentator in my last life who never made a professional tour, and I died refusing to walk off a golf course in a lightning storm. And the only reason I'm any good at any of this is that something decided to hand me the answer key. You spent 11 years becoming the best archer in 3 centuries with nothing handed to you at all. I don't think that stopped being true just because I showed up. It stopped mattering, she says, which is worse. I don't have a clean answer for that, so I don't pretend to. We sit there a while, the two of us, watching torchlight move along a wall that isn't fully repaired yet, and eventually she says, quieter, what happens to a title when the thing it measured stops meaning anything? I don't know, I say, but I know what happens to a caster whose only job was explaining other people's greatness once he finds out he's capable of some himself. You find a new thing to be good at that isn't about the number. She's quiet a long time after that, long enough that I think the conversation's over and I'm about to get up when she says, the handicap notice you got the night you took this castle. Bram mentioned it in passing, thinking it was gossip and not a threat, pending future review. Do you know what that means? No idea, I admit. I do, she says, and for the first time since she walked into my hall, there's something in her voice that isn't fury or grief. It's the low, careful attention of a hunter who's just noticed a second, more interesting trail. There are old stories among archers about draws too perfect to be sustained. Every generation, one shooter who never misses for a season, sometimes two, and then simply stops shooting. And no one who knew them will say why. My people call it the fair wind's debt. I always assumed it was a story we told to comfort ourselves for losing. I'm no longer certain. That's not ominous at all, I say. No, she agrees. It isn't, which is exactly why I think somebody ought to stay here and pay attention to what happens to you, Holt Marrow, before your handicap comes due and there's no one left who understands what they're watching. I don't ask if that somebody is her. I don't have to. She's already reaching for her bow. That's how Lyra Windcheer ends up quartered in the east tower of a castle she came to publicly humiliate. Not competing anymore, not exactly, but not entirely done measuring me either. And I've learned enough about her in one evening to know that whatever she decides to call this arrangement, staying to watch is as close to an apology as she's ever going to offer me, and as close to forgiving herself as she's willing to get. Bram, predictably, has thoughts. An elven marksman of that renown taking up residence at Thornhollow. He says over the next morning's ledger, in a tone that is trying very hard to sound like a business consideration and mostly sounds like a man watching his workload triple, will draw attention, my lord. The kind of attention that asks questions about who else might be interested in a castle that suddenly has both a walking siege engine and the former first bow of the Green Court inside its walls. Good attention or bad attention? Bram considers this with the care of a man who has learned over 3 weeks that the honest answer to almost every question about my situation is both simultaneously, and you won't know which until it's already knocking. Yes, he says, and goes back to the ledger, and I decide wisely not to push it because 2 days later a letter arrives sealed with the mark of the Ironbolt Siege Guild, and I am about to find out exactly what he meant. Chapter 4. The Trajectory Clerk. The Ironbolt Siege Guild, I learned before its emissary has even dismounted, does not send soldiers to make first contact. It sends a woman with a wooden case full of instruments and a face that is clearly decided well in advance not to be impressed by anything I'm about to do. Petra Fenwick, she says, by way of introduction, setting the case down on my own breakfast table without asking. Senior Trajectory Clerk, Ironbolt Siege Guild, Eastern Registry. I've been sent to observe, measure, and file an honest report on the phenomenon currently residing in this castle. I am told the phenomenon answers to Holt. The phenomenon would prefer Master Marrow, but I'll answer to either, I say. Can I ask what exactly you're planning to measure? Everything, she says, already unpacking the case. A folding brass instrument I don't recognize, a lacquered wind vane no bigger than my hand, 3 different sized weights, and a ledger so dense with prior notation that it looks less like a blank book and more like a career. Do you know what I have spent 11 years of my life doing, Master Marrow? I'm going to guess trajectories. Trajectories, she agrees. And there's an edge under the flat professional delivery, the specific edge of someone who has rehearsed this speech at herself in a mirror more than once. Every siege engine this guild builds, every arc a stone flies before it either wins a war or misses by 4 feet and gets somebody's cousin killed, I calculate it, by hand. Wind, elevation, the given a torsion rope after 6 firings versus 60, the exact way humidity thickens the air over a river crossing versus a dry field. It is the single most exacting discipline in siegecraft, and I am, without false modesty, one of the 3 best clerks alive at it. That sounds like a lead-in to a compliment for me that you don't actually want to give. It's a lead-in, she says, to the fact that a rumor reached my guild hall 3 weeks ago claiming a man threw a stone through a moving tension rope at 60 yards in a squall on his first attempt with no training, no instrument, and no calculation, and that this rumor has cost me 11 years of expertise the moment anyone chooses to believe it. So, no, Master Marrow, I am not here to be impressed. I'm here to find out whether you're a miracle, a liar, or a very expensive coincidence. And I intend to be thorough about it. I like her immediately. In the specific way, I like anyone who walks into a room and tells you exactly what fight they came to have. It's the same reason I liked Dob within an hour, and Lyra within a day, even mid-humiliation. This world seems to specialize in people who'd rather be honestly furious with you than politely useless. Ask your questions, I say. Run your numbers. I'll throw whatever you want me to throw. She looks for just a moment, faintly startled that I said yes without negotiating. Then she opens a ledger to a fresh page and gets to work, and I get the distinct sense this is the happiest I've seen anyone in this castle since I arrived. Here is what a full week of being studied by a professional trajectory clerk looks like for the broadcast record. It looks like standing in the outer bailey at every hour of daylight and several past dark, throwing stones, loosed arrows, one memorably ill-advised kitchen knife, at targets Petra sets up with the specific joyless precision of a woman conducting an autopsy on a theory she's already fairly sure is dead. 60 yards into a headwind, target obscured for 40% of flight time by that oak, she says on day 3, tapping her ledger with a stick of chalked graphite. Do it. I do it. The stone finds the gap in the branches like the branches have been consulted in advance. She writes something down, jaw tight. 90 yards, downhill grade, moving target at dusk with a bell ringing 11 feet from your ear specifically to disrupt your concentration. I do it. She writes something down, and this time her pen presses hard enough that I hear the nib complain. By day 5, she's stopped announcing each test out loud, just pointing, silent, at increasingly absurd configurations of targets and obstructions and distractions, and every single time the result is the same. And every single time I watch something in her expression get a little more brittle, until finally, on the 6th evening, she sets the ledger down, closes it without writing anything, and says very quietly, "It isn't skill. I did mention that. The first day. You don't understand." She's not looking at me now. She's looking at her own hands, the specific stare of someone whose whole professional identity has just quietly excused itself from the room. Skill has a shape, Master Marrow. It degrades under fatigue. It varies with the size of the crowd watching, with how much sleep the shooter had, with 100 variables I have spent 11 years learning to model and account for. Your accuracy has no shape. It's a flat line. It is the single most boring data set I have ever recorded, and I have never in my career been more afraid of a set of numbers. Afraid seems strong. Afraid is correct, she snaps, and then visibly reins herself back in, because I don't think losing her composure in front of the subject of her study is a habit she's proud of. My entire discipline exists because trajectory is hard. Because 100 small variables compound into a miss, and the guild pays clerks like me a great deal of coin to shrink that miss down to something survivable. If accuracy can simply be had, absolute, unearned, with no variables left to model, then everything I have built my life around calculating is, at best, a rough approximation of something you were simply handed. I don't know how to feel useful next to that. I don't know how anyone in my guild is supposed to. I recognized this conversation. I had a version of it on a Bailey wall at dusk with an elf who just watched 11 years of discipline get quietly outdated by a man who'd never held a bow before this world. I don't know if that's supposed to make me feel better about how many people I'm apparently obsoleting on my way to keeping a roof over Thornhollow, but it doesn't particularly. For what it's worth, I say I think you're wrong about one thing. The numbers aren't why the guild needs you. Anybody can hand me a target and watch it get hit. You're the only person in this castle who can tell me why a shot that should be impossible landed anyway, and more importantly, you're the only one who's noticed that a flat line this perfect is a warning sign and not a party trick. She looks up at that. You've noticed something too. I've had a couple weird notifications, I admit. Something called a handicap. Lyra thinks it means the wind starts helping the other guy, Eventually, I don't know if that's folklore or physics. Petra's whole posture changes, the flat professional guardedness sliding into something sharper, more alive, and the specific hunger of someone who's just been handed a real problem after a lifetime of solved ones. Then that, she says, is what I actually came here to measure, not whether you hit your targets, Master Marrow. Everyone already knows you hit your targets. I want to know what it's going to cost you, and I want to be the one holding the ledger when it starts. I decide on the spot not to tell her that a small, unhelpful part of me finds that answer deeply reassuring, in a way that has very little to do with siege mathematics. Petra's own report goes out to her guild hall the following morning, and the reply comes back faster than any correspondence has moved in or out of Thornhollow since I arrived, which tells me, before I've even broken the seal she hands me, exactly how much attention a flat line of impossible accuracy is capable of attracting once it's written down in a ledger somebody official actually reads. Guildmaster Oren Vance does not waste words. Clark Fenwick's report received, and frankly, disbelieved twice before being believed a third time. The letter reads, in a hand so cramped and hurried it looks less like penmanship, and more like a man trying to outrun his own doubts. The Ironbolt Guild is prepared to offer Master Marrow an exclusive engagement contract, engineering consultation, siege advisory, and, should he consent, direct field service, on terms considerably more generous than anything a border holding of Thornhollow's current means could match. I would ask Clerk Fenwick to remain and continue her observations regardless of his answer. Some data, once glimpsed, cannot in good conscience be left unrecorded. He wants me to sell you a job, Petra says, flatly, watching my face while I read it, and he wants me to stay and keep filling the ledger either way. I want you to know I told him before I sent the report that I thought you'd say no. I'd still like to know if I was right. You were right, I say, and something in her shoulders comes down half an inch. Though whether it's relief at the correct prediction or relief at the actual answer, I don't ask. Word of the offer, because word in this castle moves at a speed I am beginning to suspect has less to do with gossip and more to do with an actual town crier working overtime, reaches the lower bailey by supper, courtesy of a wiry, weather-beaten man named Pharaoh, who has apparently appointed himself Thornhollow's unofficial herald, and who corners me by the well with the barely contained enthusiasm of a man who has finally found someone worth reporting on properly. They're saying Ironbolt offered you a fortune, and you turned it down flat, he says, already composing the version he's going to shout across the bailey by nightfall. Is it true you said you'd rather keep the company here than take the guild's coin? Because if it's true, Master Marrow, I've got half a mind to open tonight's report with it, and the other half's already written in the line. Don't dress it up too much, I tell him, though I already know, with the weary fondness of a man who spent 19 years writing his own leads, that he's going to dress it up considerably. Just tell them the truth. I like it here. Pharaoh grins like I've handed him the easiest broadcast of his career, and by the time the sun's down, half the lower village has heard some version of the story in which I turned down a fortune for love of a castle I stole with a chimney trick, which is, if I'm honest with myself, not actually that far from the truth. The letter from Lord Trex arrives 2 days later, carried by an emissary in traveling colors, so clean and unhurried, it's clearly meant as its own message. We're not in a rush, because we do not need to be. Bram reads it first, as is his habit, and hands it to me across the breakfast table with the specific, careful blankness of a man delivering news he's already decided not to editorialize. The offer, stripped of its considerable courtly padding, amounts to this. Lord Cassian Drex of the Eastern March would like to extend to Master Holt Marrow, hero of Thornhollow, breaker of siege engines, a man of evident and rare talent currently squandered on the defense of a single insolvent, holding an invitation and place that talent in more suitable service, terms generous, titles available. The Eastern March, unlike a certain border duchy he could name, is not currently drowning in debt, and tucked into the final paragraph with the specific gentleness of a threat that doesn't need to raise its voice. Should Master Marrow decline, Lord Drex trusts he understands that talent left unclaimed by an ally is, by the old logic of the border, simply talent available to be claimed by someone else, and that Thornhollow's continued good fortune should not be mistaken for permanent protection. That's a war letter, I say. That, Bram agrees, is the politest war letter I have read in 11 years of service to this house, which I assure you is not a compliment to Lord Drex's character. He is telling you very clearly that he would rather buy you than fight you, and that if you make him choose, he has already decided which option he prefers less. Across the table, Isolde, who has taken, since losing the castle, to sitting in on exactly the matings Bram thinks she shouldn't and none of the ones he thinks she should, sets down her cup with a click sharp enough to make the point without needing words for it. I know Cassian Drex, she says. I refused a marriage proposal from him 4 years ago, back when Thornhollow still had money and I still had a choice in the matter. He does not enjoy losing things he's decided should belong to him. Ask me how I know? I take it that's not a coincidence, I say slowly, that his offer showed up 2 weeks after word got out that you'd lost the castle to somebody else instead of to him. No, she says. I don't imagine it is. There's a silence at that table that has nothing to do with siege mathematics, and everything to do with the specific way Isolde is not quite looking at me. And I am not quite looking at her, and Bram is very deliberately refolding the letter to give his hands something to do that isn't witnessing whatever this actually is. Write him back, I say finally. Tell him I appreciate the offer. Tell him I've already got a holding I like the company at. Bram's eyebrow moves approximately 1 millimeter, which for Bram is the equivalent of a standing ovation. That is, my lord, a very expensive sentence to put in a letter to a man who has 3 times the men-at-arms this castle can currently field. I know, I say. Send it anyway. Because here's the thing I've learned 3 weeks and 1 castle into my second life. About the fatal flaw that killed me the first time, I never once, on any course, in any storm, walked away from a hole I hadn't finished playing. I'm not about to start by handing a woman's home to the man she turned down just because his letter had nicer handwriting than a threat. Petra, silent through the entire exchange, closes her ledger with the specific finality of a woman who has just decided her report to the guild is going to need an entirely new section. Well, she says, I suppose I'll be staying a while longer then. Someone's going to need to calculate exactly how badly this is going to go. Chapter 5. Sudden Death. Lord Cassian Drex does not send a second letter. He sends, 11 days after the first one goes unanswered, 400 men, 6 siege engines, and a personal banner so aggressively embroidered it's visible from the Thornhollow gatehouse a full hour before the army itself crests the tree line, which, Bram informs me dryly, is almost certainly the point. Drex has never once in his career apparently sent a message he wasn't also willing to say twice louder with soldiers attached. 400, Dobbs says, up on the wall, doing the math out loud in the specific flat tone of a man who has done this particular math before and never once liked the answer. We can field 41, counting the smith, who I remind you has 1 working arm and a grudge against Drex's tax collectors dating back 6 years. Even with what you can do, my lord, that's not a fair fight. It was never going to be a fair fight, Petra says, from the battlement beside him, ledger already open, wind vane already staked into the stone. The question is whether it can be made an efficient one. Master Marrow removes force multipliers. I calculate which multipliers matter most. Between us, 41 men can look, from the outside, like considerably more than 41 men. I like her, Dobbs says, to nobody in particular. Everyone likes her, I say. It's the ledger, very calming watching someone take notes on your own death in advance. Lyra doesn't say anything. She's already on the northern tower, stringing a bow she hasn't drawn since the night I beat her at her own contest. And there's something different in the set of her shoulders that I don't fully understand until much later. The specific stillness of someone who has spent 3 weeks deciding this castle is worth more to her than to the title she lost defending it. Isolde is the one who surprises me. I expect her, when the horns start sounding along the tree line, to retreat to the keep the way half the border's noble ladies would. Not from cowardice, just custom, the old expectation that a lord's blood is worth more locked safely away than spent on a wall. Instead, she's standing in the bailey in her father's old campaign coat, 3 sizes too large, and clearly kept for exactly this occasion, directing the small folk into the undercroft with the crisp, practiced authority of a woman who has done this before during worse sieges, with less reason to believe it would work. "You look surprised," she says, catching me watching her. "I assumed you'd be safely tucked away." "This is still my family's castle, Master Marrow, whatever the open gate says about the deed." She checks the knot on a rope securing a barricade with more force than strictly necessary. I have evacuated 3 sieges from this exact bailey. I intend to make it 4. You handle the wall, I'll handle everyone who isn't currently standing on it. I don't have a clever line for that. I just nod and go handle the wall, and I think, though I don't have time to examine it properly until much later, with the benefit of not currently being under siege, that this is the moment I stop thinking of Isolde Rowan as the woman I took a castle from, and start thinking of her as someone I would very much like to still be standing next to when this is over. Here's the call, folks. Live from the walls of Thorn Hollow, and I want you to understand going in that I am narrating this partly because it's who I am, and partly because it is the only thing keeping my hands from shaking Drex's 6 engines set up at 400 yards, respectful distance, professional distance, the distance of a commander who's read the reports about a man who broke 3 engines from 60. Petra's already got the wind vane reading before the first crank sounds. 9 miles an hour north-northeast, gusting to 14. He staged them on the low ground, which means his own crews are fighting the same crosswind you are, except they have to calculate it and you don't. Copy that, I say. And I don't know where a border world castle under siege picked up broadcast jargon, but it comes out of me anyway, because apparently some habits survive death. The first stone from Drex's lead engine arcs up, and I put a hunting arrow, Lyra's borrowed, because apparently a bow works fine as a delivery mechanism for whatever the system's doing to my aim, directly into the counterweight release pin at the top of its arc, and the whole engine folds sideways with a sound like a tree, giving up on standing. 1 down, 5 to go, and 400 men behind them who haven't fired a single shot yet because their engines just started failing before they got the range. 2 and 3, coordinated timing, 11 seconds apart, Petra calls, and I take them both, one after the other, the second shot bending slightly off my original line because the winds shifted a half degree in the interval, and the system adjusts before I've consciously noticed the change, the way a good instinct adjusts a swing mid-motion without asking permission first. Lyra takes the archers on the flanks, real archers, real skill, no system beneath it, and I watch her do in 20 minutes what would have taken Ironbolt's own marksman a season of drilling, 3 shots to unstring, 3 separate advancing bowmen's weapons at the exact moment they draw, disarming instead of killing, because Lyra wins here, it turns out, has very specific ideas about what a border skirmish should and shouldn't cost in blood. Dobb and the garrison hold the gate. Bram, astonishingly, turns out to be a genuinely excellent field logistician, running ammunition and water and short, barked instructions along the wall like a man who has clearly done this before and simply never mentioned it, because a steward's job, apparently, includes knowing how to keep a castle fed during exactly this kind of afternoon. And then Drex's 4th engine, the one Petra's ledger flags correctly as the real threat, loaded not with stone, but with something wrapped and burning, aimed not at the wall, but arcing high over it toward the undercroft, where 40 villagers are currently sheltering under Isolde's direction. Zerbreg fires. This is the part I want on record exactly as it happened, because I think it matters. I see the shot leave the engine. I have, by the system's math, 11 seconds before it lands. 11 seconds is more than enough time. I've made harder shots than this in worse wind at longer range, and every single previous throw of my second life has come with a calm, certain confidence percentage sitting in the back of my skull like a spotter reading yardage. This time, there's nothing, no calibration, no number. Just my own two eyes tracking a burning projectile arcing toward a room full of children, and a strange cold silence where the system's voice should be, and for one full second, one real, terrifying second, the longest of either of my lives, I understand with total clarity exactly what Lyra's old story meant by the fair wind's debt. Petra, I shout. Numbers now, I've got nothing. 9 miles an hour, north-northeast, gusting to 19, she shouts back, already recalculating, voice cracking with the effort of doing by hand, in 4 seconds, what the system has apparently decided, for reasons none of us understand yet, to stop doing for me. Elevations shifted, winds stronger up high than at the wall. You have to lead it further than instinct says. I don't have time to trust the math over the fear. I have time to do one thing. Knock, draw, and throw everything I have left. Not accuracy, because apparently accuracy just took the afternoon off, but every ounce of a broadcast professional's trained, desperate, entirely human instinct for reading a trajectory nobody's confirmed for him, informed by 19 years of watching better athletes than me, make impossible shots on nothing but nerve and preparation. The arrow meets the burning projectile 11 feet above the undercroft roof. It isn't clean. It isn't the effortless, tedious, unglamorous perfection I've gotten used to over 3 weeks of a system doing my thinking for me. It's close enough that the impact sends burning debris scattering harmlessly across open Bailey stone instead of through a roof full of children, close enough that nobody in that undercroft ever knows how close actually was. But it isn't the flat, boring line Petra spent a week complaining about. It's a shot I made myself, afraid, uncalibrated, on instinct and borrowed math and nothing else, and it lands anyway. Drex's remaining forces, watching their most decisive weapon get swatted out of the sky by a man visibly, publicly, not using whatever unnatural gift got him this reputation in the first place, do the thing armies do when the story they were told about their enemy suddenly doesn't match what they're watching happen in front of them. They hesitate, and an army that hesitates in front of 41 defenders who've just been handed a very good reason to believe in themselves is an army that's already lost, even if nobody's told Lord Drex yet. By dusk, the Eastern March's banner is retreating back toward the tree line, considerably less aggressively embroidered looking than it was that morning, and Cassian Drex is not among the men riding it back because, Dobb reports, with the particular satisfaction of a sergeant who has waited 11 years to watch a hostile lord's plans come apart, his personal god pulled him out of the engagement the moment the fourth engine failed, unwilling to bet a war on a commander who just badly misjudged his target. We don't celebrate properly that night? Everyone's too tired, and I think everyone on that wall is quietly doing the same math I am, turning over the 11 seconds of silence where the system simply wasn't there, wondering what it means that the gift that's carried me through every fight since I woke up in this world chose today, of all days, to go quiet over a room full of children. I find out that night alone in the great hall, hearthstone cold under my boots in the exact spot I put my hand on it 4 weeks ago when the words finally arrive. Not a small notice this time, not a stat sheet, but something longer, something that reads less like a system and more like a ledger. Somebody's finally decided to let me see in full. Perfect stroke. Full scorecard first review. Host, Holt Marrow, round 18 of the current course. Handicap, rising. Present adjustment triggered by cumulative confirmed strikes exceeding the standard review threshold ahead of schedule. Congratulations are, apparently, in order. Prior hosts of this class, 17. All rounds concluded upon handicap reaching 0. Cause of conclusion, unrecorded at host clearance level. Note, standard courses carry 18 holes. Host is advised to draw his own conclusions regarding what precisely comes after the 18th. I read it 3 times. I want to tell you, for the broadcast record, that I had some clever line ready. Some commentator's instinct for landing the moment with the right amount of gallows humor to make it feel survivable. I don't. I just sit there on cold stone in a castle I won with a chimney trick and a stolen bottle of sleeping draught and think about 17 people I've never met and never will, who apparently played this exact round before me and lost, one after another, at some point nobody's willing to tell me about, on a course that only I, so far, know has a final hole at all. Footsteps. Behind me, Lyra, still in her field leathers, bow still across her back, standing in the doorway with an expression that tells me she's already guessed roughly what I just read. The fair wind's debt, she says quietly. It's not folklore. No, I agree. I don't think it is. She crosses the hall and sits down next to me on the cold stone, exactly the way I sat next to her on the Bailey wall 3 weeks ago. And for a long moment, neither of us says anything at all, because some scoreboards, it turns out, don't need narrating. 18 holes, I say finally, half to her, half to the empty hall, half, I suspect, to whoever's been running this course all along and hasn't yet had the courtesy to introduce themselves. One more than my last life ever let me finish. Then you'd better, Lyra says, figure out how to play it differently than the last 17 did. Somewhere out past the walls, in the dark beyond torchlight, a war that isn't over yet is regrouping to try again, and inside those walls a castle that owes its survival to a magic golf swing and a great deal of stubborn improvisation is, for tonight at least, still standing. And that, folks, that, against every reasonable expectation I walked onto that fairway with, is how you make it to the back nine. Petra finds the two of us there an hour later, ledger under her arm, and takes one look at the words still hanging faintly in the air where only I can see them before she says, with the specific, dry precision of a woman who has clearly already guessed the shape of the problem even without seeing the notice itself. You went quiet mid-shot, 11 seconds by my count, between release and impact, with no adjustment called. I assumed a malfunction. I did not assume it was policy. It's not policy, I say. It's apparently a schedule. 17 previous, I don't even know what to call them, players, hosts, all of them ran out of handicap eventually, and nobody's told me what happens when the number hits 0, and I'm apparently the 18th, and 18 is where the whole thing was always supposed to end. Petra doesn't say anything comforting, because comforting isn't really in her professional vocabulary, but she does sit down across from us on the cold hearthstone, open her ledger to a fresh page, and start writing, methodically, everything I remember about the notice, word for word, the exact phrasing, the exact silence, the exact moment the numbers stopped coming. If 17 others played this round before you, she says, not looking up, then somewhere in some archive this world hasn't shown either of us yet. There is a record of how far each of them got before the count ran out. That is not a mystery, Master Marrow. That is a data set. And I have spent my entire career proving that a data set, however frightening, is considerably more survivable than a mystery. You're going to research my death, I say. I'm going to research your odds, she corrects, which are not the same thing, and which are, as of tonight, the single most important number either of us will ever calculate. Isolde finds us not long after, still in her father's oversized campaign coat, a smear of soot along one cheekbone from helping haul the last of the burning debris off the Bailey stones. And she doesn't ask what the notice said. I suspect Bram's already told her the shape of it, if not the words. She just crosses the hall, sits down on my other side without asking permission, the same way I sat down uninvited next to Lyra on a wall 3 weeks ago, and says nothing at all for a long moment, which from a woman who has spent every conversation since I met her choosing her words like a fencer choosing a line, is its own kind of answer. My father used to say, she says finally, that every Rowan who ever held this inherited it already half lost, mortgaged, sieged, argued over by cousins, never once handed down clean. He used to say the trick wasn't holding a castle that couldn't be threatened. There isn't one. The trick was making sure that when the threat finally came due, there were people standing on the wall with you who actually wanted to be there. She looks around the hall, at Lyra, at Petra's open ledger, at the cold hearthstone under all three of us, like she's taking inventory of something she didn't expect to still have 4 weeks after losing everything else. For what it's worth, Master Maris, whatever this handicap turns out to cost you, you have not spent the last month collecting a garrison. You've been collecting exactly that. Zolda, Bram calls from the hall doorway, ledger of his own already in hand, tone caught somewhere between exhaustion and the specific relief of a steward whose castle is, against every actuarial expectation of the last 2 months, still standing. The lower village wants to know if there's to be a proper feast tomorrow. Now that we're not currently being besieged, I have advised them that my lord's finances remain, and I quote myself precisely, recovering, but they seem to feel a feast is owed regardless. Tell them yes, I say before Bram can start doing the math out loud. We'll figure out what it costs after. Bram sighs the specific sigh of a man who has learned in 1 month exactly how this particular lord operates and goes to tell the village yes. And somewhere, out past the walls, the last of Drex's retreating army is making camp far enough away to count as a genuine retreat. And inside the hall, 4 people who 2 months ago had no reason at all to be sitting on the same cold stone are for tonight simply sitting there together, and I think, for the first time since a horn I ignored sounded across a fairway in a life I'll never get back, that I understand finally the actual difference between finishing a round because you refuse to lose, and finishing it because you found something worth playing 18 holes for. 17 players came before me. None of them, as far as I can tell, ever got this far with company like this. I intend to find out exactly how much further that's worth.